When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I held my hands in my lap, keeping them still, while my heart broke quietly inside. I wanted to scream, to beg, to explain that I had spent years raising this family with every ounce of my strength, but I didn't. I just smiled. I packed my bags slowly, each fold of clothing feeling heavier than the last. Each item I placed in my suitcase carried years of memories, little reminders of the life I had given to the people I loved most. A scarf I had knitted for my grandson, a dish towel from the kitchen I had tended for decades, a photograph of my son as a little boy, grinning with chocolate on his face. All of it felt like proof that I belonged here. But, apparently, I did not. I remember the look in her eyes when she said it, calm, polite, almost kind but sharp underneath, like a hidden blade. I think it's time, Mom. You don't belong here anymore. I nodded, because what else could I do? I had no words. No matter how many years I had spent caring for them, loving them, being their foundation, it all seemed invisible now. The silence that followed was heavy. My son said nothing, only avoided looking at me. I could feel the quiet judgment in his eyes, the hesitation that had been growing for months, years even, that now became undeniable. Walking out of my home, the one I had built, one meal, one bedtime story, one quiet sacrifice at a time felt surreal. The street outside looked exactly the same, yet I had changed forever. And in that moment, I realized something. Love, no matter how unwavering, cannot force people to notice it. I grew up believing in the quiet power of kindness. My parents were simple people. They taught me that a home is made of love, not walls, that a family is built with care, not with words alone. I carried that with me into my own marriage. My husband was gentle, a steady presence. He was not the kind of man to raise his voice, but his quiet ways made the home feel safe. When he laughed, it was rare, but the whole room seemed to shimmer in that warmth. He worked hard to provide, but always made sure to notice the little things: a clean table, a hot meal, a smile on my face. When our son was born, everything changed again. I held him in my arms and promised I would protect him, love him, and make him feel safe, no matter what. I meant every word. Nights spent awake with fevers, days spent walking him to school, years spent saving money so he would never want for anything. It was all natural. It never felt like work. It felt like love. He grew into a quiet, thoughtful boy, always careful with his words, always looking to see if I needed help. He asked, "Mom, are you tired?" And I would shake my head, smiling, because I wanted him to enjoy being a child, to carry no burdens yet. As he became a man, I watched him find his path. He worked hard, built his life with integrity, and when he told me he had met the woman who would become his wife, I was overjoyed. I thought, finally, my son had found someone to love him fully, someone to share in his dreams. Their wedding was beautiful, full of laughter and music. I stood behind them, smiling as wide as I could, because that day belonged to them. Every blessing I whispered was for their happiness. And when my husband passed away, my son insisted I move in with him. "Mom, you shouldn't live alone," he said softly. His concern was genuine. I agreed, thinking it would be temporary, that my presence would be helpful, not burdensome. I didn't know that what I considered kindness would later be seen as intrusion. The first weeks were peaceful. I kept my distance, cleaned quietly, cooked when asked, and tried not to interfere. The house felt comfortable. My daughter-in-law was polite, and I respected her space. I thought it was working. I thought we could coexist quietly, kindly, peacefully. But slowly, I noticed subtle changes, small silences in conversations, a glance that lingered too long, then disappeared. Instructions that were unnecessary but given anyway. I tried to ignore it, hoping it was temporary, a passing tension. Hearts, however, are honest. They feel what words do not say. And mine knew. Something was shifting in our home, in our family, in the life I had poured my love into for decades. Something I could not fix with dishes, with chores, with patience. At first it was the small things, tiny moments I barely noticed at first, almost like whispers of change. My son, the boy who had once run into my arms at the sound of my voice, began to walk past me without stopping. A nod, maybe a faint smile, but no warmth, no real acknowledgement of my presence. It felt like I was becoming invisible in the house I had spent years building with love. She started rearranging the furniture. Nothing harsh, nothing dramatic, just subtle changes here and there. The old couch, the small bookshelf in the corner, the lamp I had picked out years ago, moved without discussion. At first I thought, maybe she is just making it feel like home for herself. But as the days went by, it felt less like adjusting and more like erasing. My home, my memories, even my familiar spaces were slowly being rewritten. One evening, I decided to cook a simple dinner: stew, fresh bread, and a small tray of vegetables I knew my son liked. I placed everything carefully on the table, the way I always had, hoping it might draw a few smiles, a soft conversation, or a little closeness. He came in, sat down, and picked up his phone immediately. I watched, holding my breath, hoping he would glance at me or at least put the phone down. He didn't. She smiled at me politely, but the warmth that once lingered in her eyes was gone. I tried to speak. "How was work?" I asked softly, hoping my voice sounded calm, even cheerful. "It was fine," he said, eyes fixed on the screen. "Just fine." I pressed gently, trying to coax something, anything, out of him. "Yes," he said, without looking up, and then silence returned. I swallowed the lump in my throat, holding it back because I didn't want to cry. I had spent years nurturing this family, keeping the home warm, cooking meals, mending clothes, and supporting them in every way I knew. And yet, in that moment, all of it felt invisible. My love, my effort, my very presence seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving me hollow and unrecognized. The next day, I began leaving little notes around the house, simple words: "I love you. I hope your day goes well. Don't forget to eat something warm." Hours later, I found the notes untouched, folded in corners, sometimes even tucked under a chair leg. It was as if I had whispered into the wind, hoping someone would hear, but the wind had carried my words away. I realized then that my attempts to maintain closeness were not just unnoticed, they were invisible. I tried joining conversations. Sometimes I would comment on something he mentioned at work, a memory from school, a favorite meal, or even a story from years ago. Each time, it was met with a polite smile or a nod, but no real engagement. My memories of his childhood, the scraped knees I had kissed, the nights I stayed awake when he had fevers, the bedtime stories and whispered prayers were brushed aside. The laughter and stories that had once tied us together were now treated like background noise. I felt like a stranger in the home I had created and protected. I began to question myself constantly. Was it me? Was it something I had done? Perhaps I was too old, too slow to understand their new lives. Perhaps my habits, my quiet ways of showing love, were now burdensome. I wondered if I was too traditional, too emotional, too predictable. The realization was bitter. The love that had once been celebrated and welcomed was now being treated like an obstacle, a shadow that no one needed. Small tensions started to grow. I noticed how she would clean the counters while I was arranging groceries, silently rearranging my plates, utensils, or the jars I had always kept in order. Each adjustment was polite, never confrontational, but the message was clear. This was no longer my domain. My opinion, my way of doing things, my memories tied to these objects were no longer valued. Dinner became a silent battlefield. Even when I cooked meals she liked, she would quietly comment on a minor detail. "The salt could be a little less," she would say, or "I think this needs more spice." Never thanking me for taking the time, never acknowledging the effort. My son would nod, half smiling, but without speaking to me. I felt replaced in the small routines I had cherished. I remember one evening particularly vividly. I had spent hours preparing his favorite meal: roasted chicken with vegetables and mashed potatoes. The aroma filled the kitchen, and I hoped it might bridge the growing silence. He walked in, glanced at the table, and immediately picked up his phone. She sat across, scrolling as well. No one asked about my day, no one commented on the effort, no one smiled. I ate in quiet resignation, pretending it didn't hurt, though each bite was heavy with a mixture of sorrow and disbelief. I tried to speak again. "Do you remember when you fell off your bike and scraped your knee? You cried so hard I thought I would never stop you from crying," I said, attempting a light-hearted tone to bring warmth into the room. "Yeah, I remember," he said quietly, then went back to his screen. I realized then that memories I had treasured, stories I had held dear, were no longer important to him. They belonged to a past he was moving away from, a past I could no longer inhabit. I began noticing the little ways they excluded me: whispered conversations in corners of the room, soft laughter at jokes I didn't hear, decisions made without consulting me. Even the smallest choices: what to watch on television, which groceries to buy, weekend plans, happened without my voice. I had spent decades being the quiet anchor, the caregiver, the one who stitched the fabric of this family together. Now, I was a shadow in the background, politely tolerated but unnecessary. The loneliness started creeping into every corner of my mind. I would wake early, linger in the kitchen, hoping to catch a smile, a glance, a word, but the house felt colder than the empty spaces it once held. The rooms were the same, the walls familiar, yet I moved through them like a ghost seen but unseen, present but unacknowledged. I began leaving the house for longer walks, sitting in the nearby park, watching families and couples, quietly wishing for a sense of belonging I once took for granted. I would talk to strangers in small ways, greet them, comment on the weather, smile at a passing child. Each interaction reminded me of my own humanity, yet only highlighted the emptiness waiting for me at home. I tried to adapt, thinking if I toned down my presence, tried to stay quieter, maybe they would notice me in a different way. But it didn't help. My love, my care, my quiet gestures, folding clothes neatly, preparing breakfast, placing flowers on the table were all treated as invisible, or worse, irrelevant. The most painful part was seeing him, my son, respond to her with warmth I had once expected from him. Small jokes, inside stories, little touches on the arm, private smiles. These moments were natural for them but felt like a barrier between us, a quiet wall that grew taller with each passing day. I began to realize that this was not just a fleeting feeling. The exclusion was deliberate, even if not cruelly so. They were building a life where I did not belong. One evening, I sat by the window, looking at the rain tapping softly on the glass. I held my hands together, trying to steady the ache in my chest. I whispered to myself, maybe this is how it is meant to be. Maybe my love isn't needed here anymore. And in that soft, rainy quiet, I allowed myself to feel the loneliness fully for the first time without holding it back. I realized then that this conflict was not about meals, notes, or furniture. It was about acknowledgement, about presence, about belonging. I had given decades of care, protection, and love, and yet my place in this home, in this family, had been quietly erased. The rising tension was no longer subtle. It was constant, a quiet, persistent ache in every interaction, every glance, every moment I attempted to connect. I felt unseen, unnecessary, and painfully aware of the distance growing between us. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to lie not yet, because a part of me still hoped, still believed, that love could endure, that small gestures could still bridge the widening gap. But deep inside, I knew that something fundamental had changed, something that no stew, no note, no quiet effort could repair. The house I had loved and nurtured no longer felt like home. My place was slipping away and there was nothing I could do to hold it. Days began to feel longer, heavier. I woke early, hoping to catch my son's attention before he left for work. Sometimes, I would prepare breakfast, fresh toast, eggs, coffee, hoping for a shared moment, a smile, a small acknowledgement that I was still here. But more often than not, he was already gone, leaving only the faint scent of coffee and the quiet echo of absence. My daughter-in-law's presence grew more pronounced. She never spoke harshly, never raised her voice. Her words were polite, careful, measured, but there was a subtle edge beneath them, a quiet way that made me feel unwelcome. She would rearrange the living room furniture, place new items on counters, adjust lights in the evenings. Everything was done efficiently, thoughtfully even, but it felt like she was marking territory, slowly erasing me from the home I had raised my son in. One evening, I set the table for dinner. It was simple soup, fresh bread, and a small salad. I smiled gently, hoping for connection. My son walked in, glanced at the food, then immediately returned to his phone. "Dinner's ready," I said softly. He nodded politely and continued scrolling. She sat across from him, sipping her drink, offering a polite smile that carried no warmth. I forced myself to eat quietly. I remembered the times we used to laugh over spilled milk, burnt cookies, small disasters in the kitchen. The table had once been a place of stories, laughter, and belonging. Now, it felt like a barrier I was no longer allowed to cross, a silent reminder that my presence was optional. I tried to engage him in conversation. "I remember this movie he loved when he was little," I said, gesturing toward the television. He glanced briefly at me. "Yeah, thanks, Mom," he murmured, and turned back to his phone. I nodded, silently retreating from the space. My memories, my shared history, my love all seemed invisible now. The boy who once told me everything, who shared dreams and fears, had become almost a stranger in his own home. Sometimes, I noticed them whispering softly in the evenings, sharing jokes I couldn't understand. Decisions were made without me, from trivial choices about TV shows to bigger plans for weekends or meals. Suggestions I offered, once welcomed, were now ignored or politely declined. I began to feel a growing hollowness inside. I kept busy with chores, gardening, cleaning, anything to make my presence feel purposeful. But even as I worked, I felt unseen. It was like walking through a house that belonged to someone else, even though every wall, every dish, every corner had once carried my love and effort. One afternoon, my son and daughter-in-law went on a short trip. I stayed behind, wandering through empty rooms, touching furniture that carried memories of laughter and love. I sat by the window, tea in hand, watching rain streak the glass. My reflection stared back at me, tired, quiet, invisible. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel the weight of being rejected. I cried softly, tears tracing silent lines down my cheeks. That night, I wrote in my journal, "I am here. I love them. And even if they do not notice, I cannot stop loving. But I must also honor my own heart, my own need for presence and care." The rising conflict was not loud. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic confrontations. It was quiet, subtle, and deeply painful. Each polite nod, each small exclusion, each unspoken decision, without me, added another layer to the ache inside my heart. I realized that I could not force them to include me. I could not demand recognition, affection, or appreciation. All I could do was continue loving quietly, continue waiting patiently, and continue existing in a home that no longer felt fully mine. Even small gestures became emotionally loaded. A cup of tea offered but ignored. A chair moved slightly to prevent me from sitting close. A laugh shared quietly between them that I could not join. Every act, small and polite, reinforced the distance. I began to question myself. Was I too old, too intrusive, too different? Perhaps my quiet love, my decades of dedication, had become invisible. Perhaps my presence was a shadow that others wanted to overlook. Yet, even in that quiet despair, I clung to the belief that love mattered, that small acts of patience, care, and understanding could heal wounds even if recognition came slowly, or not at all. And then, one evening, everything changed. A single event, small to them but monumental to me, revealed the depth of the distance between us. It was a turning point that I could not ignore, a moment that forced me to face reality, and forced them to face the consequences of their choices. It was an ordinary evening, or at least I thought it was. The sky outside was a soft gray, the kind that makes the house feel quieter, more enclosed. I had just finished washing the dishes, my hands warm from the soapy water, when I heard them talking in the living room. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was normal for my son and daughter-in-law to have quiet conversations after dinner, but there was a tone, soft, deliberate, that made me pause. They were whispering, not the hushed, casual kind of whisper, but the kind that carries secrets, the kind that isolates you without saying it directly. I tried to focus on cleaning, on anything that would distract me from the feeling of exclusion creeping up my spine, but my heart was heavy. I could hear their laughter, too light, polite, but hollow. They were laughing at something I wasn't part of. That I finally walked toward the living room, my steps hesitant. I cleared my throat softly. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. My son looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, and then quickly masked it. "Yes, Mom, everything's fine," he said. His words sounded polite, but they carried no warmth, no real reassurance. His attention immediately returned to her, to the conversation that was now off limits to me. I tried again later that night. I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, hoping for a shared moment, hoping to bridge the invisible distance. "Do you want some cookies I baked today?" I asked, offering a plate with a soft smile. She looked at me, glanced at him, and then back at the cookies. "Thanks, but we're fine," she said lightly, almost dismissively. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the way she said them, the polite but firm barrier, the quiet "you are not needed here," that I could not ignore. I retreated to my room that night, closing the door slowly behind me. I sat on the bed, feeling my chest tighten. For weeks, I had been noticing small signs of distance, polite smiles that never reached the eyes, whispered conversations, decisions made without me. But now, the truth was undeniable. I was no longer welcome. My presence had become unwanted. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept thinking of my son as a child, the boy who used to hide under the blanket when he was scared, the boy who held my hand when he didn't know the world. How had we arrived here? How had the love I nurtured for decades, the care I had poured into him and our home, become invisible? The next day brought confirmation. I had prepared a small breakfast, hoping for a gentle start to the morning. Toast, eggs, fruit, simple, nothing extravagant. I set the table, my heart full of quiet hope. When they came down, my son glanced at the food briefly, then looked at her, as if silently asking for her opinion. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly, and said, "Mom, maybe it's better if you just eat later. We'll take care of breakfast." Her words were not cruel, but they were precise, final, leaving no room for discussion. I felt my stomach drop, my voice caught in my throat, and I simply nodded. I poured myself a cup of tea and walked away quietly, each step heavier than the last. That day, I realized that the gentle exclusions, the whispered conversations, the polite dismissals, they were not temporary. They were deliberate, and they were only the beginning of what was to come. Later that evening, I found myself in my son's room, tidying a little, as I often did. He walked in and smiled briefly, but there was hesitation in his eyes. "Mom, we've been talking," he began, his voice soft, almost reluctant. I looked at him, searching for any hint of warmth, any sign that he still valued me. He paused, as if weighing each word carefully. Then he said something that struck me harder than anything I could have imagined. "Mom, maybe it's better if you find somewhere else to stay. We need space." I froze. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. My heart felt like it had stopped mid-beat. I wanted to speak, to argue, to beg, but no words came, only a quiet, aching recognition. The home I had built, the family I had nurtured, the life I had given everything to, was no longer mine. I felt my legs weaken, and I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled as I gripped the sheets. For the first time, I realized that love, no matter how deep, does not guarantee a place in the hearts of those you care for. She entered then, my daughter-in-law.com, composed. She did not need to say much. Her expression said it all. Polite, distant, unyielding, the final confirmation that the quiet, subtle erosion of my presence was intentional. I did not cry. I did not shout. I only nodded. I knew then that no words, no explanations, no pleading could change their minds. The decision had been made, and I was being shown the door. That night, I packed my bags slowly. Each item I folded carefully, as if by taking care of the things I loved, I could take care of myself too. My heart ached with every piece of clothing, every photo, every small memento. This was not just leaving a house. This was leaving a lifetime of memories, a lifetime of love poured into a home, into a family, into a son who no longer needed me in the way I had once imagined. That as I zipped the suitcase closed, I whispered to myself, softly, almost as a mantra, I raised them, I loved them, I gave everything I had, and I will carry that with me, no matter where I go. It was a turning point, the moment where denial ended and truth began, and though my heart felt broken, a part of me knew that survival, quiet, steady, resilient, would have to come next. The next morning, the house felt emptier than ever. I moved through the rooms quietly, each step soft on the wooden floors, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The walls, once warm and welcoming, seemed to carry a memory of me, but not a memory that welcomed me back. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, the familiar scent now bitter on my tongue. It reminded me of mornings I had shared with my son, of breakfast tables filled with chatter, laughter, and warmth. Now, the scent only echoed with absence. I tried to keep busy, folding laundry, dusting the counters, arranging small things just as I had always done, but every drawer I opened, every shelf I straightened, carried a weight I could not shake. I could almost hear the years of love and effort I had poured into this family echoing back at me, and it was met with silence. My family, the people I had nurtured, the ones I had loved without pause, were telling me, in small and deliberate ways, that I no longer belonged here. I sat for a moment at the edge of the couch, my hands clasped tightly together, staring at the quiet living room. How had it come to this? Just days ago, I had believed in small acts of love, sharing tea, preparing meals, telling stories, simply being present. I had imagined evenings where I was needed, where laughter and gentle conversations filled the air. But that image had begun to fade, replaced by polite distance and the quiet exclusion of someone no longer considered a part of the daily rhythm. When my son came into the room, I looked up, searching for anything familiar in his face. I longed for a small smile, a glance that would tell me, even silently, that love still existed between us. But his eyes were cautious, guarded, almost rehearsed, like a script he had memorized. He avoided looking at me directly, as if our roles had shifted. I had been the mother, the anchor of the family, the quiet center, but now I was someone to be handled delicately, someone to be moved aside. "Ma, are you ready?" he asked finally, voice careful, almost mechanical. I nodded slowly, holding back the tremor in my hands. "Yes," I said quietly, though my heart was heavy. I noticed then that some of my things had already been packed, small, practical items folded neatly in a suitcase. It was as if they were preparing for a guest, not for the woman who had spent decades building the life around them. I picked up the last items, my fingers lingering on each piece of clothing, each photograph tucked carefully between layers. These were more than clothes or pictures, they were memories, pieces of my life that I had poured into theirs. Each fold, each item, was a testament to years of care and patience. And yet, here I was, being ushered out, the care I had given treated as if it were nothing at all. My daughter-in-law entered the room. Then, she did not smile, she did not reach out, she simply gestured toward the door, her movements calm, almost polite. "It's time, Mom," she said. Her voice carried a certainty that could not be questioned, a quiet firmness wrapped in civility. I took a deep breath and forced a small nod. Words formed in my mind, begging to escape, but no sound came. What could I say? That I had given everything, that I had spent decades loving, nurturing, protecting, and supporting this family, that I had been a mother and grandmother who had quietly carried the weight of others' happiness while my own heart quietly cracked. None of it would matter. They had already decided. The suitcase felt heavier than ever as I slung it over my shoulder. It carried more than clothes, it carried memories of scraped knees I had kissed, nights spent soothing fevers, birthday cakes baked with trembling hands, whispered prayers, and endless hours of waiting up just to make sure my son and his family were safe. Each step toward the door was a silent testament to a life given freely, yet unrecognized. I paused at the threshold and looked back at the house one last time, the kitchen where I had baked countless meals for birthdays, celebrations, and quiet evenings, the living room where my son had learned to read, laughed, and sometimes cried, the small nook by the window where I had read stories to him on rainy afternoons, where his little hands had clutched mine. Each corner of the house whispered stories of the past, each a testament to love and care, and yet, those memories were no longer mine to claim, they belonged to them now. And I was no longer welcome. My son paused at the door. For a fleeting moment, the warmth I had longed for shone in his eyes. "Mum, I know this is hard," he said, voice soft, almost breaking through the wall that had grown between us. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a faint smile. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The door closed softly behind me. The sound echoed on the quiet street, and I felt the finality of it in my bones. The air was cool, damp with the remnants of morning mist, and the sky hung low, gray and heavy, as if the world itself understood the sorrow I carried. Each step I took down the driveway felt deliberate, weighted with the years of care, sacrifice, and unspoken love I had given. I walked slowly, letting the suitcase roll beside me, its rhythm a soft echo on the stones. Neighbors' lights flickered in the distance, unaware of the quiet tragedy unfolding just beyond their doors. Each step I took felt like a piece of my heart being left behind, each memory a heavy stone I could not set down. For a long moment, I stopped under a streetlight, its soft glow falling gently on my face. I closed my eyes, and the memories came rushing back to my son as a boy, arms thrown around me when he scraped his knee, the whispered secrets I had kept for him, the laughter that had once filled every corner of the home. I remembered his first day of school, the way he had held my hand tightly, trusting me completely, relying on me to guide him through the world. All of it had shaped me, had defined my life, and now it existed without me. Tears threatened, but I held them back. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry, of breaking in front of them. My dignity was all I had left. I pressed my lips together and drew a slow, steadying breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs. The pain in my chest did not soften, but I carried it with quiet strength, refusing to let it define me entirely. As I continued walking, the weight of the suitcase began to feel lighter, though only slightly. Perhaps it was not the weight of clothes, but the weight of realization, the understanding that love, no matter how deep or constant, does not always guarantee recognition. I had given everything I had, yet it had not been enough to secure my place here. I paused again, thinking of the small moments that had led me here, The quiet mornings when I had cooked breakfast while they slept. The evenings spent mending clothes or helping with homework. The nights I had stayed awake, listening for coughs or footsteps, ready to comfort or guide. All of it had been given freely, without expectation of reward. And now, all of it seemed to vanish, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk, carrying the weight of a life I had devoted to others. I realized, in that moment, that the turning point was not simply about being asked to leave. It was about the awakening to a harsh truth, that even the deepest love may not always be enough to guarantee a place in someone's life, that even the years of sacrifice, care, and dedication may not prevent the quiet exclusion of those we hold dearest. The street stretched out before me, empty except for the occasional passerby, unaware of the storm of emotion I carried. I held the suitcase handle tightly, feeling the strain in my hands, but also the pulse of determination in my chest. I will survive this, I whispered to myself. I will honor the love I gave, and someday I will find a place where I belong without having to demand it. In that quiet, gray morning, standing beneath the faint glow of a streetlight, I felt something shift inside me. The heartbreak, the sorrow, the aching loneliness, they were still there, but underneath them, a small flame of resilience had begun to burn. Life, I realized, sometimes asks us to leave even the places we have built with our own hands, even the homes we have made sacred, and yet, it also asks us to keep going, to find a new rhythm, a new place, a new beginning. Step by step, I continued down the street, the suitcase rolling quietly beside me. Each movement forward was a choice, a decision to carry the lessons, the love, and the memories, without allowing the rejection to define me entirely. I thought of my husband, of the quiet mornings we had shared, of his gentle smile, of the love that had never faltered. I carried that love with me, an invisible strength that would guide me even when the world seemed unkind. By the time I reached the corner, I realized I was no longer simply a woman being sent away. I was a mother who had given everything, a grandmother who had cherished every moment, and a person who could endure even the quietest heartbreak with dignity. I could not force recognition or belonging, but I could choose to honor the life I had lived and the love I had shared. And so, I kept walking, each step an act of quiet defiance, each breath a promise to myself. I did not know where the road would lead, nor what the days ahead would bring, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The love I had given, the life I had built, and the heart I had opened were not diminished by their rejection. They were mine, and I would carry them forward, gently, quietly, with unwavering strength. Under the gray sky, in the damp morning air, I began the next chapter not with anger or bitterness, but with a slow, deliberate resolve to survive, to heal, and to find a place where love was both given and returned. The street was quiet as I walked, my suitcase wheels making soft clicks against the stones. Each sound felt like a small reminder that I was alone, entirely alone. The night was cool, the sky dim with the fading light of day. It was as if the world had paused for me to feel the weight of this moment fully. I passed by familiar houses, homes filled with families laughing and sharing their evenings. The sight struck me deeply, a pang of longing in my chest. I had once imagined growing old, surrounded by love, by the children I raised, by the warmth of family, and now I walked outside my own son's home, carrying nothing but a suitcase and memories. I found a small bench near the corner of the street and sat down. My shoulders sagged under the weight of exhaustion, not just physical, but the heavy fatigue of emotional betrayal. I thought of my son, of his quiet eyes, avoiding mine. I thought of my daughter-in-law, almost cold, telling me I didn't belong. Every detail replayed in my mind, a relentless loop. I couldn't stop. Tears slipped silently down my cheeks, unbidden. I let them fall, not in loud grief, but in quiet surrender. This was my truth, the pain of being pushed away by those I had nurtured, loved, and sacrificed for. The years of devotion, the countless moments of care, and it seemed like they were invisible now, erased in the blink of a decision. I pressed my hands to my face and whispered softly to the night, how did it come to this? How did the family I built with love become a place that rejects me? The wind rustled through the trees, gentle, almost consoling. It felt like the world itself was reminding me that even in sorrow, there is a breath of solace. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. The ache in my chest did not disappear, but I felt a small flicker of clarity. I could not change what had happened, but I could decide how I would carry it forward. I remembered all the times I had poured myself into their lives. I remembered waking early to prepare breakfast for my son when he was just a boy, staying up late when he was sick. The endless hours of tending, of teaching, of loving. I had given everything without asking for anything in return. That love had shaped me as much as it had shaped them. And now, even as they rejected me, that love remained. It remained because it was never conditional. It remained because it was mine to give and mine to hold. No one could take it away. I sat there for a long while, letting the city quiet around me, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. Then I looked down at my suitcase, heavy with the items of a life abruptly uprooted. Each fold, each neatly packed piece of clothing, carried a memory, and each memory reminded me of who I was, of the life I had lived, of the heart I had given, of the love that could not be erased. A soft thought passed through me, fragile but insistent. Maybe this is not the end. Maybe being pushed out is a chance to find a place where I am truly seen, truly valued, truly at peace. For the first time since they packed my bags, I allowed myself a small hope. Not a loud, triumphant hope, but a quiet one that whispered gently in my heart, I could survive this. I could continue. I could find or create a space where my presence mattered not because I demanded it, but because it was recognized, appreciated, and welcomed. I rose from the bench and continued down the street. Each step was heavy, but purposeful. Each step carried the memory of the years I had lived, of the love I had given, and of the dignity I still possessed. I realized then that the turning point was not just about rejection, it was about awakening, about understanding that life could take unexpected turns, that even the ones we hold dearest may hurt us, and that our strength is revealed in how we choose to move forward. The night deepened, and I walked on, past the familiar homes, past the quiet gardens, past the warm lights that I once imagined sharing, and I felt a small but undeniable shift inside me. The sorrow was still there, yes, but now there was also determination, quiet, steady, unyielding. I whispered into the night, I am still here. I have loved, I have endured, and I will continue. Always, I will continue. It was in that moment, alone, under the vast sky, that I understood something essential. Rejection does not define our worth. Exclusion does not erase our love. And even when the world turns away, the heart can remain steadfast, resilient, and hopeful. I walked on, each step lighter than the last, carrying my suitcase and my memories. The city around me slept, the stars beginning to appear faintly above, and I allowed myself to imagine a future where love was returned, where kindness was met with warmth, where I could rest in the comfort of being seen. The turning point was not just a door closing, it was the moment I realized that life would go on, that I could go on, and that my capacity to love, to give, and to heal was stronger than any moment of pain. The morning after that long night felt different. The sun rose softly, pale and gentle, filtering through the branches of the trees that lined the quiet street. The air was cool, and carried a faint scent of dew and damp earth, the kind of freshness that seems to promise a new beginning. I still had my suitcase beside me, still felt the ache in my chest, but beneath the sadness, there was a strange lightness. Maybe, I thought, just maybe, I could begin again. I found a small bench in the park, tucked under a flowering tree, where the grass was soft and the petals were dotted with dew. I sat down, setting my suitcase beside me. For the first time since that door had closed behind me, I allowed myself to breathe without thinking of their house, their words, or the quiet hurt I carried. For this moment, it was only me and the morning, and that was enough. I looked around at the park. A little girl's laughter rang out as she chased a stray balloon, her mother calling after her in gentle tones. A man jogged past, waving briefly to an elderly neighbor sitting on another bench. I watched the sunlight flicker through the leaves, dancing softly across the cobblestones. There was life everywhere, calm, persistent, moving forward. And I realized that I, too, could move forward. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small notebook I always carried. Over the years, I had filled it with little thoughts, memories, and reflections, birthdays celebrated, trips taken, afternoons spent quietly together, even small meals shared. Flipping through the pages, I felt a warmth rise in me. Even if they did not see me now, even if they did not value me in this moment, I had been a constant presence in their lives. That truth, I realized, could not be erased by absence or distance. I began to write in the notebook, not for them, but for myself. Words flowed slowly at first, hesitant, Then, with more confidence, I made a list small things I wanted to do, not to gain recognition or approval, but to honor myself. A cup of tea by the window each morning, letting the light fall on my hands as I held the warm cup, walking slowly through the park, noticing the birds and the clouds, feeling the rhythm of my own breath, reading the books I had always wanted to finish but never found time for, calling old friends whose laughter I had missed, whose voices reminded me of simpler, happier days. Even these small acts felt revolutionary after years of putting everyone else first. I had spent decades shaping my life around their happiness, silently carrying the weight of their needs, their comfort, their joys, and now, it was time to nurture myself, to notice that my own heart also deserved care. I thought of my son, I thought of my daughter, and a quiet thought emerged, gentle but insistent. Anger would not heal the wound. Bitterness would not bring warmth back to my chest. The love I had carried, though now distant, was still mine. Perhaps, one day, it could even be the bridge to understanding. But for now, the focus had to be on me, on reclaiming my own peace, and remembering that my worth was never determined by someone else's acceptance. Later that day, I wandered into a small cafe near the park. The smell of fresh bread and brewed coffee wrapped around me like a gentle hug. I ordered a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the world move past. Mothers held hands with children, couples exchanged quiet smiles, friends laughed together. And though a small ache of longing stirred within me, it was accompanied by a quiet hope. Warmth could exist outside the home I had lost. As I sipped the tea, I noticed the small acts of kindness around me. A barista offered a smile when I hesitated at the counter. A customer held the door for an elderly man behind them. A young mother shared her umbrella with a passerby when the wind picked up. These small gestures reminded me that even when family fails, humanity does not. People see each other. People care. Slowly, I felt the heaviness in my chest begin to lift, replaced by a soft, steady resilience. That evening, I took my notebook and wrote a letter to my son. I did not intend to send it. I wrote to release the words I had carried for so long, words that had gathered weight in the quiet corners of my heart. I love you. I always have. I will always care. Even if I am not wanted now, I am proud of the man you have become. I hope one day we can sit together again, and if not, know that my love never fades. As I wrote those words, a strange lightness filled me. I was no longer clinging desperately to a bond that had been broken. I was honoring it, respecting it, and, at the same time, reclaiming myself. The pain did not vanish, but it became bearable, a quiet reminder of what had been, rather than a crushing weight I could not escape. The following days became a gentle rhythm. Mornings were for tea and writing, afternoons for walks, small errands, and discovering the city around me in a way I had not before. Evenings were for reading by the window or listening to soft music, letting the notes settle into the spaces that had felt hollow before. Life did not stop because they had closed a door on me. Life continued, and slowly, I was learning how to step fully into it again. One afternoon, I was walking through the park when a young woman approached me, hesitating slightly. "Excuse me, could you tell me which street leads to the library?" she asked. I smiled softly and gave her directions. She thanked me, and we exchanged a few words about the city, her gratitude, her warmth. It touched me more than I expected. I realized then that even though my family had rejected me, there were connections waiting to be discovered, small threads of human kindness that could fill the spaces left empty. That the days stretched into weeks, and with each passing moment, I began to see myself differently, not as a victim of rejection, but as someone who had endured, who had loved fully, and who could now choose how to exist in the world. Freedom, I realized, lay not in seeking approval, not in demanding affection, but in honoring oneself. I could honor the past without being trapped by it. I could love without expecting the same in return. And I could continue to be present, carrying dignity, grace, and my heart intact. Sometimes, I would stop on a quiet bench in the park and watch the sunlight play across the water in the small pond. I would remember my son as a child, his laughter, his curious questions, his shy, gentle voice, and instead of feeling bitter, I would smile, knowing that those moments had shaped both of us. My love had been a gift, freely given, and that was something no one could take away. I began to find joy in small, simple things, a fragrant cup of tea on a rainy morning, the softness of a blanket wrapped around me as I read a book, the quiet companionship of an old friend's call. I noticed how powerful it felt to choose my own happiness, how strong it felt to care for myself without guilt. One morning, I ran into a neighbor I had not spoken to in years. We shared a slow walk, talking about small things, the weather, the garden, the children in the neighborhood. Her kindness reminded me that the world was not empty. There were people who would see me, who would listen, who would share a quiet moment of connection, and for the first time since leaving the home that had once been mine, I felt a sense of belonging not in a house, but in the world itself. I began to write more in my notebook, recording these new experiences, these small victories. I wrote about the laughter of children in the park, the warmth of a stranger's smile, the beauty of flowers that seemed to bloom just to remind me that life went on. Each note, each memory, became a stepping stone, guiding me toward a life rebuilt from love, courage, and quiet determination. One evening, as I sat watching the sunset, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, I realized that the pain of rejection had softened. It was still there, yes, a quiet ache that whispered memories of what had been lost. But it was no longer heavy, no longer binding. I had carried the love I had given, and in carrying it, I had discovered a deeper truth, that love, once given, remains. It shapes us, strengthens us, and can guide us even through the darkest hours. I began to understand that the door that had closed behind me was not the end of my story. It was a beginning of a chapter where I was allowed to love myself fully, to seek joy without expectation, and to experience connection in ways I had never imagined. Life, I realized, was full of quiet opportunities, small moments of warmth, kindness, and care that could heal a heart, even one that had been rejected by those it loved most. Step by step, day by day, I began to rebuild a life of my own. I embraced the quiet routines, the small joys, and the connections that were waiting just beyond the door I had once thought was my only home. And in doing so, I discovered something precious, that belonging does not always come from blood or family. It comes from finding peace within oneself, from honoring the love you have given, and from opening your heart to the quiet beauty of the world around you. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to find a new rhythm. I woke each morning with a quiet sense of purpose, not out of obligation, but out of intention. My mornings were my own, filled with sunlight streaming through the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, and the gentle scribble of my thoughts in my notebook. It was a small, private ritual, but it reminded me that I still existed, still mattered, and still had the ability to find joy in simple things. I discovered a small library in my neighborhood, tucked between tall trees and a quiet street. There, surrounded by the smell of books and the soft murmur of other readers, I found a sense of peace I hadn't realized I had been missing. I would linger over stories, sometimes laughing quietly at a character's antics, sometimes shedding a soft tear at moments that resonated too closely with my own life. In that space, I felt alive again, connected to the world in a way that did not depend on anyone's approval. Occasionally, I would run into familiar faces, neighbors I had once waved to but barely spoken with. They began to ask me how I was, sharing small conversations over the fence or in the grocery store. Their kindness was gentle, unassuming, and it reminded me that warmth could be found in unexpected places. Each interaction, no matter how brief, felt like a small stitch mending the frayed edges of my heart. I also began to cook again, not for my son or his family, but for myself. Simple meals, fragrant with spices and herbs, that I could savor alone or share with a new friend. It felt liberating to reclaim this small part of my life, to realize that nurturing myself was not selfish, it was necessary. Each bite carried the flavor of independence, resilience, and quiet satisfaction. One rainy afternoon, I found myself standing by the window, watching drops race down the glass. My reflection stared back at me, and for the first time in months, I did not see only pain or rejection. I saw a woman who had endured, who had loved deeply, and who had chosen to keep moving forward. The loneliness was still there, sometimes, but it no longer consumed me. It became a gentle companion, a reminder of the life I had lived, and the strength I had discovered within myself. I also began to write letters. Not to my son or daughter, at least not yet, but to old friends, distant cousins, and people I had lost touch with. Each letter was a small bridge, a chance to reconnect, to remind myself and others that love and attention could still be given and received. The act of reaching out felt like watering a garden that had been left untended for far too long. One evening, as I walked along the quiet street near the park, I saw a little girl struggling to carry a heavy bag. Without thinking, I went to help her, and her mother thanked me warmly. The simple gratitude in her eyes and voice struck a chord in me. It was a reminder that small acts of care mattered, that kindness could be given freely, and that the world still had moments of light, even after heartache. I thought often about my son. I did not dwell on anger or resentment. Instead, I held on to the hope that one day he would understand the depth of my love. And even if he never did, I had found my own understanding. My love was not diminished by rejection. It could exist independently, quietly, patiently, without expectation or demand. On quiet nights, I would sit by the window with my notebook, writing down memories and reflections. I remembered birthdays I had celebrated, nights spent reading stories, mornings of laughter and warmth. Each memory, though tinged with sorrow now, also carried the sweetness of connection that could never be taken away. I realized that my role in their lives had been valuable, meaningful, and enduring, even if unacknowledged at the moment. One afternoon, a neighbor invited me over for tea. We sat in her garden, sunlight dancing on the leaves, sharing stories and soft laughter. In that moment, I felt a sense of belonging that I had not experienced in months. It was not the same as my son's home, but it was real, tangible, and comforting. I began to understand that family is not only defined by blood or shared walls, it is also found in moments of human connection, kindness, and shared care. Slowly, the sting of rejection began to fade. I carried it still, as one carries a scar, a reminder of pain endured and lessons learned. But it no longer dictated my days. I was learning to live fully again, to embrace the quiet joys, and to nurture my own soul. And then, one evening, my son called. His voice was hesitant, soft, filled with an unfamiliar vulnerability. He did not apologize outright, but he spoke with a warmth and concern that had been absent for so long. I listened quietly, feeling a gentle relief rise within me. I realized then that bridges, once burned, can sometimes be rebuilt not in grand gestures, but in patient, steady steps. I did not rush him, and I did not demand anything. I simply held the line of my own dignity, patience, and love. I had learned that reconciliation is not about proving worth or winning approval. It is about remaining steadfast in care, even when unseen. As days passed, I continued my routines, my walks, my letters, and my quiet joys. I began to see myself not as a woman discarded, but as someone who had endured, loved, and reclaimed her life with grace. The pain of rejection remained a part of me, but it was no longer the whole story. It had become one thread in a larger tapestry of resilience, hope, and quiet triumph. And finally, I understood a simple truth. Love, when true, does not vanish, even when unacknowledged. Strength is not measured by absence of pain, but by the courage to continue loving and living fully despite it. And life, always life, moves forward, sometimes carrying us to unexpected joys, unexpected friendships, and unexpected peace. Over time, I began to notice subtle, yet profound changes in myself. The anxiety and heaviness that had clung to me like a shadow after leaving my son's home started to lift, slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. Each day, it seemed, I felt a little lighter, my chest a little less tight, and my mind a little less crowded with worry. I no longer measured my days by their acknowledgement or approval. No longer did I wonder if my presence was noticed or appreciated. Instead, I measured them by small joys, small moments of beauty, and the connections I could nurture, however modest they seemed. At first, these joys were very simple. A cup of tea held warm between my hands, the smell of fresh bread baking at the bakery down the street, the laughter of children playing in the park nearby. I would pause to watch a sparrow hop along the fence or listen to the wind rustle through the trees, letting the small rhythms of life remind me that the world continued, and I still belonged in it. One day, almost on a whim, I walked into a local community center. The building was modest, with walls painted in soft colors, and the faint hum of conversation drifting through the rooms. I asked if they needed volunteers. The coordinator, a woman with a kind smile and tired eyes, welcomed me immediately. She explained that they needed help teaching reading to children and assisting older adults with small errands. I agreed, uncertain how I would fit in, but eager for the distraction, for some purpose beyond my quiet, solitary walks. The first week was simple, even awkward. The children stared at me, some shy, some brimming with energy, unsure what to make of a quiet woman who had suddenly entered their world. I introduced myself softly, letting them take their time to respond. "Hello, I'm Mrs. Clare," I said gently, my voice calm. "I'll be helping with reading today. Can anyone tell me what their favorite story is?" Some children whispered, some giggled. Slowly, smiles began to appear. Slowly, trust began to build. With each session, I felt a quiet warmth spreading in my chest. When a child read a sentence correctly, their eyes lighting up with pride, I felt a surge of joy I hadn't experienced in months. When an older adult expressed gratitude for a small favor, fetching groceries, or reading a letter aloud, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't realized I was missing. Their smiles, their simple thanks, the soft words of encouragement, they became sunlight pouring into spaces I hadn't known were dark. In giving my attention and care to others, I realized that the world still had room for me, and I had room to give. One quiet afternoon, while sitting on a bench in the park, I noticed a woman sitting alone on a nearby bench. She looked familiar in a way that tugged at my heart, a quiet, hesitant figure, carrying a weight in her eyes that I recognized immediately. It was me, a few months ago, trapped in sorrow, unsure if the world still had a place for me. I walked slowly toward her, setting my suitcase aside, and sat gently at the other end of the bench. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, careful not to startle her. She looked up, startled, then hesitated, before nodding faintly. "I think so," she replied, her voice low, hesitant. I nodded, letting silence settle between us for a few moments. Then I spoke, gently, about the park, about the weather, about the flowers in bloom. Slowly, she began to talk, sharing fragments of her story, the small burdens she carried quietly. I listened, offering nothing but presence, gentle words, and soft encouragement. By the time we parted, she smiled, a real, heartfelt smile, and something in me shifted as well. In helping another person feel seen and valued, I felt my own heart lighten. Love, I discovered, could extend beyond the walls of a home or the bounds of family. It could ripple outward, touching lives in ways I had not imagined. Letters became another sanctuary for my heart. I began writing to old friends I had lost touch with, sharing memories of birthdays, holidays, simple anecdotes, and heartfelt reflections. Some letters received replies, while others did not. Yet it did not matter. The act of reaching out, of forming connection, reminded me that my life was not defined by the household I had left behind. There were countless ways to give and receive love, and each letter was a thread weaving me back into the fabric of life beyond my grief. Sometimes, when the world was quiet, I would sit by my window and let memories of my son wash over me, not with longing or despair, but with a tender reflection on the years we had shared. I would close my eyes and see him as a child, small and hesitant, wrapping his arms around me when he scraped a knee, whispering, "I love you, Mom," at bedtime, his voice soft and vulnerable. Those memories were mine, untouchable and pure, and they reminded me that love is never truly lost, it simply changes form. Then, one day, as unexpected as sunlight through clouds, my phone rang. I glanced at it, the name making my heart skip a beat. It was my son. His voice trembled slightly when he spoke, a sound I had not heard in months. Vulnerability. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked. I felt a lump rise in my throat. My mind raced with 1,000 emotions, yet my voice remained calm, warm. "Of course, my dear, any time," I said softly. When we met, there were no dramatic apologies or declarations, no tears, no raised voices, no long explanations, just a quiet acknowledgement of the months lost, of the misunderstandings, and the unspoken words. We walked slowly, side by side, the city streets filled with muted sunlight, and the distant hum of life continuing around us. He spoke hesitantly, choosing his words with care. "Mom, I didn't know how to say it, and I didn't want to upset anyone. I was stressed, and I didn't handle things well. I should have been more present. I'm sorry." I listened quietly, nodding softly. I did not interrupt, did not correct, did not place blame. Instead, I offered empathy, the simple gift of being present. "It's all right, my love. I understand," I whispered. 4 hours, we talked, about life, about regrets, about the months we had lost. He shared moments of confusion, the pressures of his own household, the things he hadn't known how to communicate. I shared softly, not in anger, not in accusation, but in reflection, about my hurt, my longing, and my love that never wavered. And in that conversation, I realized something profound. Reconciliation does not require grand gestures. It often begins with a single dialogue, with openness, patience, and a willingness to listen. In the days that followed, our connection slowly began to reweave itself. I did not demand love or attention, nor did I insist on immediate restoration of closeness. I simply offered warmth, presence, and patience. Gradually, the walls that had grown between us began to soften. There were still quiet silences and awkward pauses, but these were balanced by small acts of care, shared memories, and moments of laughter. It was not perfect, but it was real. And that reality carried more weight than any idealized version of family could have. I also noticed a change in myself. The fear that had kept me small, that had made me feel invisible, began to fade. I walked more confidently, spoke more freely, and allowed myself to find joy without fear of judgment. Small pleasures became profound. The smell of coffee in the morning, the sound of a bird calling outside the window, the warmth of sunlight on my face. I had learned that life could be gentle, even after heartbreak. One rainy afternoon, my son and I sat in a small cafe, the windows fogged with condensation. I watched the drops race down the glass, thinking about how, for months, my heart had felt just as blurred and obscured. He reached across the table, gently touching my hand. "Mom," he said softly, "I've missed this. I've missed you." Tears welled up, but I held them back. Instead, I smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "I've missed you too, my dear. Always," I whispered. We did not rush. We did not try to fill the months lost with words or promises. Instead, we walked slowly, step by step, letting the warmth of small moments, of shared presence, heal what had been broken. And I realized that love, once offered, does not vanish. It can wait, patient and enduring, until hearts are ready to receive it again. In the following weeks, our relationship deepened gently. We shared meals, small conversations, quiet laughter. I visited my son's home occasionally, welcomed with cautious smiles from my daughter. Though it was not the same as before, it was something new, something built on honesty, respect, and patience. I no longer felt invisible. I felt valued, not because they owed me acknowledgement, but because I had learned to find value in myself and the love I had to give. Evenings became my favorite time of day. I would sit by my window, the city lights twinkling in the distance, listening to soft music, and reflect on the journey I had taken. I had been shown the door by my family, but in leaving, I discovered my own strength. I discovered that life offers many forms of belonging, and that home is not always a place. It is a state of being, of connection, and of self-respect. I also learned to embrace joy without fear. I found friends who valued me, neighbors who included me, and small communities where my presence mattered. Each interaction reminded me that love does not have to be confined to a single household. There are countless ways to experience connection, countless ways to leave a mark, and countless ways to feel seen and appreciated. By the time months had passed, I had grown into a version of myself I had not known was possible. I was calm, steady, and quietly confident. I no longer defined myself by the acceptance of others. Instead, I measured my days by the moments of kindness I could offer, the love I could give freely, and the joy I could find in the world around me. I had survived heartbreak, not just by enduring, but by opening my heart again, gently, cautiously, and fully. Looking back, I understand that life is a tapestry of love, loss, patience, and growth. Being rejected by my family was one of the most painful experiences I have ever faced. It tested my resilience, my heart, and my understanding of love. But it also taught me profound lessons about self-worth, patience, and the nature of human relationships. I learned that love does not require constant acknowledgement to exist. True love endures even when unseen, unspoken, or unrespected. Strength is not measured by avoiding pain, but by choosing to continue caring, living, and finding joy despite it. I discovered the quiet power of small acts, a handwritten letter, a shared smile, helping someone in need, or simply being present for myself. These moments became the foundation upon which I rebuilt my life, one day at a time. And now, when I sit by the window, sipping my tea, listening to the soft hum of the world outside, I no longer feel lost. I feel steady, alive, and connected to the past, to the present, and to the countless small acts of love that continue to shape my days. To anyone listening, I want to share this simple truth. Even when those we love seem distant, even when rejection stings, your heart has the power to endure. You can find peace within yourself, kindness in the world around you, and a quiet joy that no one can take away. Life is not always easy, but it is always moving, always teaching, and always giving us opportunities to love, heal, and grow. And so, I move forward not because the pain has vanished, but because I have learned that love and life are not measured by what others give, but by the courage to continue, the patience to endure, and the quiet grace to embrace each new day.